I'm Thierry Heles. This is The Next Leap. So, you've spun out of university to sell your shiny new invention. How do you attract customers? You'll need a marketing strategy, which isn't a fancy way of saying put ads on Google or post on social media. Rather, marketing is everything that comes between your company and your customer. It's the art of figuring out your value proposition, crafting messages that resonate with your customers and your investors, and evaluating markets to find traction. It will even help you decide whether you really should raise VC funding. Nicky Dibben runs Invention Marketing, helping Deeptech founders build their marketing strategies. She's worked with groups like Gritstone and Deeptech Labs, which together run an accelerator program for startups emerging out of the ecosystem around the universities of Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield. On today's episode, Nicky shares her experiences mentoring startups, she offers tangible advice for founders, and she ponders how product has become king of the hill, even though that is not the right focus. Nicky, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to this. This is going to be quite a unique conversation, I think.
Let's hope so.
You have founded your own marketing consultancy, Invention Marketing. Can you tell me a little bit about what your work entails?
Absolutely, yeah. I started working for myself, more than 25 years ago now, and I've been doing that ever since, with the exception of 3 years when I was VP marketing for a company out in New Zealand. And really, it's about taking technology to market. I'm really focusing on the marketing side of things. And when I say marketing, I mean, marketing with a capital M. So we've got all 4 Ps in there. So to me, marketing is everything that comes between your company and your customers. And that's what I look after. So I do a variety of things. So mentoring, advising, consultancy, really, but all based on my own framework, but really delivering whatever my clients need. So some clients need, a quick sort of state of the union on where they are, what the gaps are in their business. Other people know exactly what they need and they want me to go and, write up an 81-page marketing strategy. Other clients I have on more of an advisory basis where we do a strategic workshop every month. We do a tactical call every week. I'm there, on demand as needed. So really all things marketing with a capital M for tech, high tech and deep tech.
Amazing. What is your definition of marketing in this concept? What is it that you do? I know you said you might write entire 81-page strategies or advising, but what does marketing mean?
To me, marketing is about, as I said, everything that comes between your company and your customers. So it's, especially for tech companies, we don't go straight from tech to market. We have to go from tech to product. We have to work down from the market to figure out what problems we're actually solving. And then in the middle, we have to really clearly articulate what problem are we solving, for whom, with what. So to me, marketing is really, to go back to, 1980s textbooks, it's all 4 Ps. It's the product. How do we get from technology to product? It's price and place. What is our business model? What are our routes to market? How are we getting this technology in the sweaty little hands of our customers? And then it's promotion, which is the 4th thing. And part of the problem is that most people think marketing is just the promotion side of things because product has taken on a life of its own, especially in tech companies. Product is the king of the hill. And then the price and place elements get subsumed into everything from sales to operations to commercials to whatever. And then we're left with promotion. And that's why when you say marketing, people think about doing marketing, and actually the promotional side of things. Whereas to me, I do what I call the thinky bits of marketing. How do we get from technology? And again, we don't go straight from technology to market. We don't go from lab to market. We go from lab to office to traction to market. So it's really just figuring out how we're going to succeed in business, really, to me, is what marketing is all about.
Yeah, you're not the person that just writes the pitch deck and then that's it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I have dabbled in pitch decks, but to be honest, this pitch deck is a very fine art. And what I help companies more with is, I love the phrase telling the story of your technology, but I don't mean let's talk about a rags to riches story and throw it in some slides. I mean, how did our technology come about and how is it going to change the world and how do we tell people all about it and how do we position ourselves in the market so that people go, oh, I really want some of that. So it's in the grander scale telling the story. So I do pitch decks occasionally and I've reviewed pitch decks. And again, it's, which I think we'll talk about maybe later, is the difference between customer messaging and investor messaging. And really my focus is on getting you customers, not getting you investors, basically.
Okay, yeah. Has this marketing changed over the decades? Is this something new?
Over the decades? How old do you think I am?
Over the years.
I do get called the wise old lady of all sorts of things, and I choose to take it as a compliment. I think where it's changed really is, I think, with this whole thing about product taking over being king of the hill. Marketing used to be very much all 4Ps or, 7Ps, 19Ps, depending on which framework you looked at. And I think
19. I'm struggling to think what they are.
There's one framework that's got about 19 Ps in it, and please don't ask me to name all of them. It's like, I think I could just about get to the 7 if I try really hard. And what's happened, especially with tech companies, is because your key differentiator really has to be what you're doing with your technology, what products you're turning it into. Product has very much taken over as king of the hill in so many companies. And in some respects, that's fine because product is the thing that you're competing upon. But there's a couple of problems with that. One is that there's sometimes a gap between product and the rest of marketing. How do you fill that communication gap? So the product people, some are more commercial than others, some are more technical than others. And then, of course, another issue is when you've got multiple products, which most companies should aspire to do, who is product? What is product? Does one person own lots of products, or does each product manager think they rule the world? Where's the oversight? Where's the accountability? And to me, that's why product should pretty much remain one of the 4Ps. So what I find has happened now is, yes, product has taken over. And when you say marketing to most people, they immediately go to promotion. They go to, what should my logo look like? What color blue should my logo be? How many hoodies shall I order? What shall I put on Facebook? That's where people see marketing as. And there's another problem with that, which is that if you leap to that tactical stuff, before you've done the thinking things, you don't go straight from technology to market. So you don't go straight from, we've got a technology to, let's throw lots of money at Google ads or social media or PR even. Because if we don't know really what our proper marketing, what our positioning is, what our messaging is, what our value proposition is, then you're wasting money on the fluffy bits of marketing. So I think that's what's happened. And I'm not saying promotion isn't a very valuable bit of marketing. I mean, it obviously is. But doing it without everything else that comes before it and supports it, you're just wasting your money. So to me, that's the biggest change that I've seen in marketing. And I don't think it's for the better, sadly, because I do spend a lot of my time. When I explain what I do, people go, oh, that's marketing then. I mean, I did a talk for one of the universities that I'm working with, and it was literally called The Role of Marketing in the Commercialization Process. And I had people come up to me afterwards and were like, oh, you really opened my eyes because I didn't realize marketing was all those things. So I spend a lot of time educating.
It's interesting. And I think before we spoke, I probably would have thought of marketing as, it's the people that put things on Twitter and LinkedIn and Blue Sky and what have you. And yeah, they make the funky t-shirts and logos. You mentioned universities. One of the people that you work with is NG Studios, Northern Gritstone's accelerator program. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do with them?
Yeah, absolutely. They're doing lots of really good things. So Deeptech Labs is down here in Cambridge, which is where I'm based. And they have 2 programs. One is an open program that they run once a year, and they take on about 6 businesses. Normally, they've spun out already, so they're not in the university as such. They come from a university, but they've pretty much spun out. And they run an intensive 12-week program. So once a year is the open one, and then twice a year is the NG Studios one, which is supported by Northern Gritstone. And they are the universities at Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, and Liverpool this time around as well. So my role really is to, other than rocking up to all the events and meeting all the cohorts, my role is as a mentor on that program. So they use me as part of the program. So for instance, I would do a half-hour session with each of the cohort, all in one morning, but one-on-one, sort of stacked up, whether it's value propositions, whether it's product market fit, whether it's business model, whether it's how you tell the story of your technology. They've got a program and they kind of slot their mentors in according to our specialist subjects, really. I help them there. And I also do the Northern Triangle up north, which is Leeds, Sheffield and Manchester. And they're a little earlier stage. So there's a little bit of overlap. One of my Sheffield people is also on the NG Studios cohort, but they're normally a little bit earlier and they may not have spun out of the universities. And that's a bit more sort of like the speed dating equivalent of mentoring. They have 12 mentors and 12 potential spin outs in a room, and we go around the room, they get 20 minutes with each of us and leave exhausted at the end of the day. And then my logic to that is, well, if you can't handle, a day of 12 people who are on your side, telling you nice things, trying to help you for free, you really have no place trying to set up a business in the real world, because you won't survive a fortnight.
Yeah, you've got to be crushed by pitching to investors and being told that your idea is not worth any money.
Exactly. Yes, if you can't cope with some nice people that are on your side. So yes, I've been doing this, I think this is my 3rd cohort on the Deeptech Labs program now, and it's a lot of fun and you get to meet a lot of really interesting technologies and people.
Amazing. Are there differences between, you being based in Cambridge, are there differences between the Cambridge ecosystem and the Northern England ecosystem?
There are. It's fascinating. I went to a climb conference in Leeds last year. I'm going again this year. I'm on a couple of panels. That'll be fun. And it was interesting because we were in a roundtable event and it was about the north-south. I wrote a post about it afterwards. So it was like, it's really tricky because on the one hand, this southern snobbery, right? We're better than the rest of the country. We've got the golden triangle. You've just got this northern triangle. But then on the other hand, you go up north, there's a little bit of a sort of the chips on shoulder thing as well. So you have to get rid of both of those things, right? If you're going to communicate successfully. And also think that ecosystem is kind of different up there because it's much more sort of industrial tech. It's still deep tech, but it's robotics and it's manufacturing and it's food and it's usually slightly different tech. In Cambridge, it is very much, I'm generalizing, but it's pretty much computery tech or it's sort of medically, biosciencey, life sciencey tech. There's not much in the way of industrial stuff down here, probably because we just don't have the space to do it, quite frankly. Whereas, up north, we've got the Advanced Manufacturing Centre just outside Sheffield, which is massive. I went for a walk around there a couple of months ago. It's lovely. Amazing, great big robots that they just pop in to test some robotics ideas. How can we have plug and play robots as opposed to having to build them from scratch? So it's much more industrial, which I actually found really fun because I find any technology is really exciting once you get like a level or two down in it. I can now talk about food proteins and, replacement fats, and I can talk about robotics and all sorts of stuff, which is great fun.
That's very cool. That manufacturing facility sounds amazing. I have to see if I can wiggle an invite for a tour.
Oh, yeah. We'll have to go for a wander around there. It's like a big dome, basically, and they have all this lovely little pods around the side. You can just walk around in a circle and look at all the different things they're doing, from, modular nuclear reactors to how do we cement walls better. And, it's fascinating. There's lots of good stuff going on. I'll make an intro for you. We'll make that happen. We'll go on a field trip.
Awesome. Well, this is all right. Podcast done. I've reached my goal. I've had an invite to Sheffield.
I'm issuing invites on behalf of other people. It's all good. I think that's the other thing about the northern ecosystem. It's just, Cambridge is very friendly in its way, in that there's lots of people you can go to for advice and people will always introduce you to people and recommend you to people. And there's a real giving back vibe in Cambridge. There's so many people that have been there, seen it, done it, exited their companies. Now they are on the sort of speaker circuit and they'll give you lots of advice and all that good stuff. Whereas up north, it's just much more, everybody kind of piles in and, offers everybody else up. I had somebody from Sheffield, just said to somebody else, oh, Nicky will talk to you about that. And just, offered me up, which is absolutely fine. And I love it. I went up there the other day and I told you, oh, you're part of our crew now, which I really liked. Both ecosystems are different and special in their own way. And I enjoy them both. But I think partly being Irish, I've got to admit, I do go up north and I thoroughly enjoy it.
That's an argument for ecosystems not trying to replicate the culture of other places as well, because it obviously works in both places. It just works slightly differently.
It does. The Northern Triangle, to my mind, can look at the Golden Triangle and go, okay, well, what's good about it? What will work for us? What might not work for us? But I think it has to stand on its own, so it's three legs if it's a triangle, and just figure out what is right for the ecosystem up there. So there are bits of Cambridge that you could transplant up there, but there are a lot of bits that you can't and shouldn't. You have to work out what's right. It seems to be a lot more collaborative. So I think Leeds and Sheffield and Manchester probably talk to each other a lot more than Cambridge and London and Oxford talk to each other.
Yeah. You've touched on this, everything being so focused on product these days. Why do you think this marketing with a capital M is so often missing from early stage startup support, considering there are so many programs for early stage startups?
Yeah, I think what I find more and more is that the two things that they tend to focus on, they're sort of not quite right in two ways. So it's MVPs and pitch decks, right? Let's get a minimum of a product out the door and let's get a pitch deck out the door to get money in the door. There's sort of two problems with that approach. One is that actually, especially in the case of Deeptech, an MVP, what you really mean by that is product. So MVP might not be right. It might be prototypes, it might be proofs of concept, it might be joint developments. Deeptech land doesn't necessarily lend itself to just MVPs. And the second thing is when you say pitch deck, you really mean money, right? No, so not necessarily a pitch deck. You just mean how are we going to fund this thing? And they're the two things that get the most amount of attention. And what doesn't really get the attention is the stuff that I do, which is how do you design and build a business for the real world? And that's what I do. How do you move from investor money to customer money? How do you get traction in the marketplace? How are you properly articulating what's special about you? And it's not that it doesn't get attention. It's just that it doesn't sort of get pulled out as a thing. It kind of gets subsumed into everything else. And I think if we make it a bit more if we articulate a bit more that it's actually a separate strand of activity which overlaps with both. So to my mind, it's not the technology, it's not the money, it's the everything else. And it kind of interfaces with both of those worlds, but it's not completely sat in either of those worlds. It's how do you bring those worlds together and build a business? And so I think there's just been so much focus on the technology and the product and then on the money. And so they're kind of like, oh, meanwhile, we should actually get some customer money in and we should build a business for the real world. that just kind of seems to like fall through the gaps somehow. But the more people I speak to, the more they're going, we actually have realized we need to make this a real thing, which is great for me because it means that, I'm getting a really, really welcome reception to when I go and talk to people because, we don't do what you do, can you come and help us? And I'm like, of course I can.
Say I am a startup coming to you for help. What is that conversation that we have? How do you help me find my value proposition and my business model?
It depends on where you are, because quite often the starting point is not, I need a value proposition, or, I don't know what my positioning is. One of the starting points is quite often messaging, because people realize that messaging is kind of the starting point for how your business interfaces with the outside world. So messaging is kind of a recognized thing. But at the same time, I sort of look at my framework and it's got messaging. But also, before we get to messaging, we've got what are our business goals? What's our product roadmap? And we looked at the market. How do we fit into the market? How do we make our technology meet the market? Actually, do you know what your positioning is? What do you want to be known for before you start going out there with messaging? But so normally it's messaging. But what we then tend to do is sort of have a 10-minute look around my framework and go, where are your actual gaps? Because actually, just starting off with messaging isn't usually the right thing, because it'd be like, there's more fundamental questions. Do you actually know what your product is? Yeah, kind of. We've got a technology. Okay. Do you know what your business model is? Oh, well, yeah. So it's usually sort of quickly working out where the gaps are. So quite often they'll be like, well, I've got this technology and here are my end users. And I'm going, yeah, okay, but here are the 13 ways you can reach them. We need to pick some of those. So for instance, say you're developing an app just for, Deeptech's not normally an app, but it's kind of a good example of routes to market. You're quite often not going to be selling that directly to your end customers. The app store sits between you and your end customers. And the same is true of, for instance, battery tech. One of my Sheffield people is doing some sexy battery tech. But they're doing a bit of a sell, which they need to sell to the cell people, who then need to sell that to the battery people, who then need to sell that to the end users. So you're just going, I've got a bit of a battery, and here are my end users. They make big, fast cars. You need to join that gap. The first step really is a mini audit. I do have a maxi audit, which is actually my entire framework, 120 questions. And then you can really see, actually, your positioning's really good, but your messaging's not that great, or your product roadmap's got some gaps in it, but actually, weirdly enough, your routes to market look okay. But really, because I've been doing this forever, it's what I do. It's quite easy within 10 minutes to go, actually, what we need is this. And then it varies. So, some clients will do a half day and will have cracked your business model entirely. Or other clients, I'll spend 3 months chatting to you nearly every day to really get the full everything done. But because my framework's modular, we can kind of work it out quite quickly. It's got an order to it, but at the same time, it's modular. So if, for instance, you know exactly what your products are, you can defend and justify them to me. You can explain your business model. You really know what your routes to market are. But the bit you're really just struggling on is finding the right words, then that's what we'll focus on.
I will put a link in the show notes to the framework as well. I realize it's quite hard to sort of visualize it when you don't have it in front of you. It's quite clear when you read through it how it works and where you're coming from. What are some of the key considerations then when you tell a startup story?
There's a couple of issues. One is that we have to do this, which I referred to a little bit earlier, to match up your technology with your market. So quite often people will say, well, I've got this technology and there's this market. So I've got some sexy algorithms and cybersecurity is scary. They don't meet in the middle. You don't go out to market with a big market to a technology. So I wouldn't say I treat my clients like toddlers. I don't. But there's a lot of, which means that, and they say something else and I go, so that we can. So most of the answers are in my clients' heads, right? They know this stuff, but because they're so close to it, they're focused on their technology and their market. So we'll go, okay, well, what are the products we can turn this technology into? And they'll go, oh, well, we're agnostic. And I'm like, please don't be. We have to actually, pick some stuff we're going to do with this. We work up from the technology to actually the products and services we can start delivering and how we're going to deliver those. So for instance, just going, oh, I've got this machine. Okay, well, that's still not specific enough. So we bring specificity to the party. Are you selling the machine? Are you selling parts for the machine? Are you selling blueprints so other people can make the machine? Are you selling things you make with the machine? Are you renting machines? And people go, oh, I'm like, there we go. So we need to, figure out that stuff. And then at the other end, how do we get from the market to the actual problem that we're solving within that market? And so we've moved up a layer from the technology, down a layer from the market. And then we make those things meet in the middle. Okay, this is the problem I'm solving. This is the people I'm solving it for. This is how I'm solving it. So that's kind of the starter for 10 on the value proposition. And then we have to work up the words around that, because that's another thing, is I spend a lot of my time translating technology to human, I call it. Because we get so immersed in our technology that we forget the rest of the world doesn't quite get it. And then it's a real balancing act, because you have to be far enough ahead of what the world's doing right now that they go, oh, I really want that. That's really exciting. But you also have to be close enough to what they're doing right now that they understand you. You need to meet them where they are and have a frame of reference that leads them to the next step. I did some work years and years ago for AT&T Labs when they were here in Cambridge. And I think they were even Olivetti and Oracle in those days. That's how long ago that was. And they had this amazing technology, but it wasn't just like 2 steps ahead of where the world was. It was about 8 steps ahead of where the world was. And what we'd do is we'd write the business plan and then we sort of put it in a drawer. And then every year we'd get it out and look at it again. And it took about 5 years before the rest of the world had moved on enough that we could go, okay, here's our thing that's just 2 or 3 leaps ahead of what you understand now. And people were like, right, I get it. So you have to sort of balance this whole, I mean, a lot of what I do is making lots of extremes meet in the middle and filling gaps. But yeah, you have to interface with people's world enough that they get what you're saying, but it has to be compelling enough for them to be interested. So that's really it. We sort of figure out, telling the story and what that looks like and how it's going to resonate with people.
It's kind of interesting to hear the technology as you've envisioned it might be too far ahead of where the rest of the world is at, and you kind of need to either figure out a few intermediate steps or, I don't know, wait for the world to catch up with you almost.
Yeah, you have to find a way of bringing people with you, because that's the other thing. It's like, if you're asking people to stop doing what they're doing and embrace what you're doing, even that in itself is 2 steps, because people can't move sideways. They can't just replace A with B, right? They have to go get rid of A and go back to 0 and then learn a new thing, which is B. So that's already a 2-step process. So if you're way too far ahead of people, it's just too complicated, really.
Do the steps differ in terms of investor and customer messaging? Are there different approaches to how you tell that story?
Yeah, definitely. I focus on the customer side of things, but I'm also have to be able to do the investor stuff as well, because they have to match. So what remains the same is your positioning remains the same, right? So once you've decided this is what we want to be known for, this is what makes us special, very factual. I don't tend to do the whole starting with the why thing, because nobody really cares about your why. They care about what's in it for them. What are you doing? How are you making their lives better, etc. So your positioning will remain the same. What do we want to be known for, right? We want to be known as being the fastest or the cheapest. The positioning's always got a superlative at the end. But you then have to sort of slice and dice that according to who you're talking to. So for instance, an investor is going to want to know that you can solve a really big problem for a lot of people. A customer is just going to want to know that you can solve their problem. Thank you very much. An investor is going to want to know where you're going with your business, where you're taking it. Whereas a customer is kind of going to want to know where you've been and who else you've solved this problem for and why they should believe what you're saying. But your positioning remains the same. You just slice and dice your story according to who you're talking to. And then with something like a pitch deck, you kind of have to combine the two, because you need all your investor messaging so they go, oh, wow. But also this is where people go wrong, is that they forget. You can't put your customer messaging in an investor deck because that's not the right messaging. But at the same time, you do need to include the why customers are going to be interested in you in that. So you need to fill that go-to-market gap properly as well, which is where the customer messaging comes in.
Yeah. It makes so much sense listening to you explain it that, if I'm the customer, I want to know, well, who are your other clients? Am I the first one? Am I the guinea pig? In which case, I'm probably going to watch my money a bit. And if I'm an investor, the question is, how big will this be? How many customers could you have? And how much money will I get back from you?
Yeah. But at the same time, you're doing that with the same business. So you have to kind of do both. Yeah.
Do you find that founders are generally open to what you're trying to teach them?
Yeah, they are. And that's the thing. As soon as I talk to people about what I do, they're like, oh, yeah, we need some of that. Just yesterday, I was on one of the fireside chats, one of the programs I support, and they were saying exactly this. People don't buy technology, they buy products. And I'm like, well, that's exactly what I help with. How do we get from technology to product? And that's not just a technical journey. That's a narrative as well. And as soon as I explain to people things like, again, like the machine story, you're not selling a machine, or the whole, actually, you're not going to sell directly to end users. So since I start giving examples, people are like, oh, yeah, we really ought to fix some of that then. And one of the other things really, I suppose, is the beachhead markets, which again, to me is a really big part of what I do. Technology companies think the best thing in the world they can do is say, oh, we're a platform or we're agnostic. That's actually the worst thing in the world you can do. You need to focus on the markets that you could get success in. And as soon as I explain, you can't be all things to all people. You think you're a Swiss Army knife, you think that's awesome. But unless your customer's in the market for a Swiss Army knife, they just want the bottle opener or the little tiny screwdriver or the knife. You're not selling a Swiss Army knife. You've got to pick a lane. What are you actually going to be? Or we could be all of these 12 things. And I'm going, okay, well, let's rank these 12 things. Let's evaluate these 12 things. Let's work out which markets you can get traction in. And, it has to be big enough to be interesting, but small enough that you can get a foothold in it. Where are you going to focus? I don't go in and talk marketing textbook because no one needs to hear that. But explaining it in terms of what it really means to their business and how you can't move forward in 6 directions simultaneously. That's not a real thing. So how are we going to focus and prioritize?
Yeah, even if because platform technologies do exist, and even if you genuinely have one, as you say, you're not going to start selling to 6 different markets. You're probably going to start with one. And then if you get traction, eventually you might add a second one.
Yeah. And how do you evaluate it? So when I did my VP marketing gig, in the end, we were selling to 150 countries. But again, we had to focus. So what we did was I'd sort of have 3 tiers of countries at any point in time. the top sort of 3 or 4 that we were focusing on them, we were selling really hard, etc. The second tier, we were continuing to evaluate. We were looking at them to see, well, which have got more legs than others, which do we think we should go after? And then every month we'd regroup. And from that tier 2, some companies would move out of the list entirely because they just weren't worth it. Some would move up to being a tier 1 country. In the meantime, tier 3, we had all the ones just trickling around in the background that we'd gather information as it came in, but we weren't doing anything active. And maybe then a couple of those, if we found some interesting things in those tier 3s, they'd move up to tier 2, would do a bit more research. And it's sort of the same with your markets, whether it's vertical markets or geographical markets. It's a constant balancing game. And the way you do it is just by figuring it all out, and constantly you have to allocate the time to regroup and look at where you're at and make decisions.
Yeah. Do you find that first time and repeat founders approach marketing differently? Are they equally open, or have repeat founders maybe already learned all those lessons?
Well, I think what's really, really interesting is that pretty much any exited founder, who will then maybe a second-time founder, maybe just off on their nice yacht somewhere, I don't know. When you ask them, what's the one thing you wish you'd done from day one? Every single one of them says marketing. They say it's creating market categories for yourself. It's educating the market. It's being strong and bold and productizing your product and actually saying, no, you may not have. It comes in blue, right? You take it or you leave it. No, I will not give you a green one and you an orange one and you can't have 3 extra widgets. Marketing is also about making product decisions. And every single second-time founder will use marketing with the capital M in the way that I do it and say that's the thing that they wish they'd focus more on day one. And I think first-time founders, they sort of tend to fall into 2 categories. There's the category that think anyone can do marketing, and or it's fluffy, and or it comes later. And to be honest, I can't help those people because I can't educate the whole world. But the people that get it, get it. It's not about doing marketing. It's about having a marketing mindset and realizing that everything that leaves the building is marketing, right? Everything comes from your company and your customers is marketing. And that's a mindset, not a list of stuff to do. And so if people get that, then absolutely, I can help them. And that's why some of the programs sort of changing and starting to be more aware of how we talk about marketing and a marketing mindset, and like a market strategy, for instance. You got a strategy for your finance, you got a strategy for your tech. Why don't you get a strategy for your market? How are you going to get there? Then it's starting to improve, and they're the people that I can help. And because I spend most of my life in, deep tech and high tech land, I think I have less of an issue. There's not as much of the whole, we'll do it later and it's just advertising anyway. I think there is a better understanding of what it really is.
Yeah, and especially with deep tech, there is such a big education piece to the marketing often, because as we said earlier, the customer might genuinely not quite yet understand what you're trying to sell them. We talked a bit about the initial challenges that you face with figuring out value proposition. How do these challenges in marketing evolve as companies grow?
You sort of get a better kind of problem, I guess, really. And that when you're starting out, the decisions are all 0 to 1 decisions. What markets should we actually go into and how are we going to get traction? Traction is sort of the real tipping point there. How do we get to where we've got traction and what does that look like for our business? And you can talk about product market fit. I don't tend to, because to me, everyone's got a different definition of product market fit, right? Is it because you've got revenue, repeatable customers, money in the bank? Is it a journey? Is it a destination? Is it a state of mind? So I don't really tend to talk about that, but traction's a bit more easily recognizable, I think, and then have revenue connotations associated with that. One of the problems you move to is, instead of being, what should we do and how should we do it and who should we do it for? It's like, what should we do next and who should we do it for next? And you kind of have a better class of decision because you've got some revenues coming in. And now you're thinking, well, at what point do we go to another market, or should we consolidate in this market more? And if we do a new product, should it be a new product for the same market, or should we have the same product and go to a new market? So you're kind of in, Ansoff's matrix territory here, which is same market, new product, same product, new market. The one that you don't do is go diagonally and do new product, new market. So there's the sorts of decisions that you're kind of wrangling with it at that point. And actually, do we do neither and just get deeper and penetrate in the actual market and product that we're in? We might not have exhausted that yet. And so I think what changes really is you get to be a bit less scrappy and a bit more grown up. You get to start to systematize things a bit more and be a bit more disciplined. They used to call me the Duchess of Discipline when I was VP marketing for all these reasons, because you just get to be a lot more disciplined about what you're doing, and you have to be.
That's a great title. I like the alliteration as well, Duchess of Discipline.
The Duchess of Deeptech Discipline, yeah.
We talked about educating customers. Are there any other challenges that are unique to deep tech in marketing?
There's a couple. One is the fact that the sheer, we can be agnostic thing is a problem, right? Because you've got a longer time to get to market in deep tech usually. But the problem with that is that you think you've got all the time in the world and you actually don't. You still have to make some decisions and decide what markets you're going into and decide what product. You don't have the luxury of time, even though you kind of think you might. There's that. And then I think the biggest one really is, how do we balance sort of thinking on a grand scale? We can change the world with our technology. versus, what can we actually do reasonably in the next day, in the next week, in the next month? How do we tell that story and get the early customer adoption? And I think education is one of the biggest pieces. My analogy here is, you listen to people talk and you're like, you're reading me a page from your book and that's lovely, but I haven't seen the spine of your book on the shelf to know whether I want to pick it out. I haven't seen the picture on the front of the book to make me go, oh, I like that. I haven't read the blurb on the back of the book to even know what it's about. And you're just reading me a page from your book, which I'm sure is jolly lovely, but I need to wrap the other bits around it. And that to me is one of the, I think, the biggest challenges in deep tech, because we're so close to it that we think that what we're saying makes perfect sense. And to us it does, but to the rest of the world, not so much. Because if you just use one phrase at the start of what you're saying that people don't understand, you've sort of lost them for the rest of the time because they're trying to catch up on themselves and work out what that meant.
Yeah, or acronyms. In your head, you're kind of more trying, as you say, you're kind of trying more to catch up to what the acronym was or what that term was that they used, and then they've lost you, really.
Yeah. We think we're talking to a knowledgeable audience, and you might be, but they still might not know that particular acronym. So I always say, the first time you use an acronym, just spell it out. So there was one, and he talked about additive manufacturing. And it took me ages. And all he had to do right at the start was go additive manufacturing. Oh, that's 3D printing for you and me, but on a more industrial scale. Close brackets. Carry on with what he was saying. But it took me ages to work out, even though I kind of knew, but it took me ages to figure it all out. And the people that already know aren't going to be offended. And the people that don't know will be very, very grateful. So one of the tricks I always use with people is I say, don't ask people to repeat back to you what you've said. Ask them to reflect back to you what you've said. Because that way you will be able to tell whether they understand it or not. And they'll use their own language and their own words. And you'll be able to then figure out where your messaging is hitting the mark and where it isn't hitting the mark and what you might need to change. Because you'll be using your customer's language at that point, not your own.
Yeah, I did a panel at University of Bristol a few days ago, and one of the other panelists was talking about how she really hates the term the cloud because it's so nondescript. It's stuck, unfortunately, but you have customers that you're selling the cloud to, and really it's just someone else's hard drive at the end of the day. It's just a hard drive that sits somewhere else, not in your computer. But people just, they don't really understand what it means. And
it's just amorphous, fluffy thing. And even the first time I heard it, I'm like, I've got a degree in computer science and I still don't quite get this. Where's it sitting? What happened to it rains? It's like,
Yeah. When the terminology first became a thing, and there was a train station in London, they just had a big banner from, I think, Microsoft just saying, oh, the cloud is here. And I was like, I used to work in IT. And I'm like, I don't know what this means. Yeah, explain it to me.
Explain it to me in words that I understand. So if I keep saying it's like the pensions guy, I keep saying, I understand your sentence. It's just the words in it I'm having trouble with.
I like that.
I think the same is true of technology. The sentence makes perfect sense, but then you look at the words and you're like, yeah, not quite.
Yeah. I think I threatened that I was going to ask you what your favorite company is, and I won't. But can you give me any examples of startups that you work with that did well after they nailed their marketing strategy? Or maybe even some that you managed to turn around, quote unquote?
One of my favorite examples, possibly because it involves Las Vegas, is years and years ago, I was working for a company and they're called Orthogon Systems, and they've been subsumed into Motorola and various other companies since. But they had some really sexy radio technology, which involved MIMO, which is multiple input, multiple output, antennas. See, I'm explaining my acronyms as I use them. Radio is basically either licensed or unlicensed, right? And if it's licensed, you have a license to use that spectrum. Nobody else can trample all over you. You could operate your radios in that spectrum and you're free of interference. Unlicensed radio is just fair game. If somebody tramples all over you, you can't complain because it's unlicensed. But because of their very sexy technology, the messaging that we came up with, which was absolutely brilliant, because it resonated with what people already understood, but it took them a step further, was we talked about licensed performance in the unlicensed bands. And that was really, really clever because people understood the problems with unlicensed bands, which were that you get interference, but they also understood the problems with licensed bands, which were that you had to pay to use them. So the whole unlicensed performance in the licensed bands, that just hit the nail on the head perfectly because people understood it and could immediately relate to it. And that company did brilliantly, well, so brilliantly, it then got bought by Motorola. And then what was fascinating was to then sort of bring it full circle. I don't think I'm telling tales of Motorola because this was quite a long time ago. I don't think they'll mind. But at one point they rang me up and they said, oh, we just want to pop a licensed product into the portfolio. Will you do us a couple of new slides? And I was like, no, I will not. What I will do is take 3 steps back and reevaluate your whole product portfolio, what this now looks like, where this new product might fit in the family, and recreate the messaging for the whole family. But you can't have built this entire licensed performance in the unlicensed bands and then just pop a licensed product in there. You've just broken all the rules of marketing. So they wanted me to do half a day's work and I ended up doing about a fortnight's work. But it wasn't to get the work. It was because what they wanted was fundamentally just broke the rules, and I wouldn't allow them.
You'd be so confused as a customer if you're being pitched everything in unlicensed band, and then you're like, but apart from this one, just, these next 3 slides are something completely different, and then we'll get back to the unlicensed bit.
It wasn't going to work. And by the time I finished, it obviously did all, hang together really nicely. But the messaging was clearly not the same at that point, but it was right for what they were doing then after that. That was a lot of fun. I think the main problem is really, it's how do we tell the story of our technology without losing our audience along the way? If we're going to pick any fairy story, it needs to be Goldilocks, right? Because you can't be too hot or too cold. You can't be too big or too small. You can't be too small in your thinking. But at the same time, if you go out with massive headlines is another thing where I think companies tend to get it wrong. So I was doing some stuff up north a while ago, and they sort of started with this massive headline, we're going to diagnose this disease in hours rather than weeks. You can't start with that because you're immediately on the defensive because no one will believe you. So you're spending the rest of the time with people going, well, I don't believe that. You're going to be permanently on the defensive. I said, look, if you've got a headline like that, build to it and say, the problem now is this, but if we change this, and if this happens, and by the way, this is where our technology fits in, then we will be able to diagnose this disease in hours rather than weeks. Build to the headline. And this is, again, I think why I don't like some of the sort of storytelling in inverted commas stuff, because it is all about the massive headlines and the rags to riches and the hero's journey. And actually, sometimes you just need to go, this is what's happening in the world. This is how we think the world needs to change. This is how we're changing it. And by the way, and I think you can build to a headline. Whereas I think starting with the headline, I feel like that's sort of the wrong approach, really. Build to your headline, and then it's actually more believable because you've sort of built up as you've gone along.
Yeah, as a journalist, the headline tends to be what I write last as well. You need to know what the story is before you figure out the headline. And yeah, sometimes you even have to bury the lead because you kind of want to take people on that journey. We talked about figuring out business models earlier. I think in Deeptech, when people think Deeptech, the first instinct is always VC money. And I think in Deeptech that often does make sense because the sums of money that you need are often so massive that no bank would give you 300 million to develop some kind of product. But is VC always the right route to pursue for startups? How does a marketing strategy help them figure that out?
Yeah, you see, I have really mixed feelings in this one because you're right. The numbers that are involved means that a VC, is going to have to be involved at some point in time. It's not so much that wanting VC money is the problem. It's the step before that. It's the assumption that VC money is the answer that is the problem, I think. Instead of going, how could we bootstrap this? How do we get customer money early on? How do we think about what this business might look like in the real world? What could it look like if we organically grew it? There are some businesses that are not so deep tech that they require 300 million and, 100 engineers and this much lab space. There are some businesses that are sort of high tech, deep tech, but you can already see how they can be deployed, how they can be sold, how they can actually quite early on start generating customer money while you build the business. So I think VC money is normally going to be the answer, but it's more about challenge that assumption before you even start. Don't immediately go MVP and pitch deck, MVP and pitch deck, we must have investor money. So I think VC money is probably right, but ask yourself, what would you do if that wasn't happening? How would you design and build this business if that money wasn't available to you? So I had one company a while back. When I first spoke with them, I said, have you considered bootstrapping? Someone else said to them, have you considered bootstrapping? And a few months later, they were going, oh, I need this many millions. And I'm like, whoa, what happened there? Because they've been sort of indoctrinated to the only way is the VC way. And so, yes, usually it is. But again, you have to make decisions, not just default. It's like every software company is SaaS now. I'm like, you do know that's a business model, not an industry. And did you decide that, or was it just the default? As long as you've made a decision that SaaS is the right business model for you, as long as you've made a decision that you need VC money, I have no problem with it. But challenge everything. Don't just have these defaults imposed upon you.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a business struggle to survive because it raised the wrong kind of money?
Oh, this is where we sort of get into numbers rather than words, I guess. And I think the main problem is, I don't know about any specific first set examples, but I would imagine that the problem there really is more where the money side of things is kind of structured wrongly. We've all heard the horror stories about, oh, I've sold my company for 10 billion, got £3.50. So I think on the number side of things, there's probably been some really, really badly structured deals. There's both good and bad about VC, isn't there? Because VC got literally invested. And I think not all VCs are created equal either. So on the one hand, they can sort of take you in certain directions that you may or may not want to go in. But on the other hand, do they help you scale your ambition so that it's bigger and better? I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody go, I wish I hadn't taken that VC money. But I do think there are probably businesses that could have survived without it had they tried.
That's fair. There's probably founders out there that wish that I had maybe taken VC money from a different VC investor. As you say, they're not all created equal.
Yeah, it's a whole different world. I mean, I went to an event where all these companies were saying, oh, we're AI companies. And I'm like, well, there's two problems here. One is you're not all AI companies. You're a productivity tool and you're a med tech device and you're a whatever else you might be. And you're actually looking for the AI stack. underneath the product decisions you've already made. And I'm not sure I can help those people. And do they need VC money? They claim they do, but if you've already made your product decision and you're just looking for an AI stack, you don't necessarily need VC money, you just need money. There's sort of two types of companies. There's the ones that lurch from VC funding to VC funding and how long is my runway? And the other side of the coin is, actually, we want to run this business in the real world. Customer money is the best type of money to get. How can we get more of that? We need a fundamental mind shift, I think, to have more of the whole customer money is the best money. Let's really, really focus on that. And if a VC helps us on the path to that, great. But let's not just keep putting our hand out for more. Let's actually go, look, let's have this funding round be our last one because we're going to crack the market this time rather than, waiting for the next round of money. I know I'm making it sound really easy and it's not. I do think there's a bit of a cultural thing that could possibly shift a little bit.
No, I think that makes complete sense, actually. You mentioned earlier that you work with Northern Triangle as well, and that is often companies that haven't quite spun out yet. Do you think tech transfer offices have the right approach to marketing for their spin outs? Do they understand this?
They're all very different. This is what's really interesting, because even if you look at Leeds, Sheffield and Manchester as 3 examples, right? They're all within the Northern Triangle. But Sheffield is very much founder-led. So what the founders want, the founders have to ask for, the founders will get. So they get all the support in the world that they want. But they kind of have to drive the process. They have to choose to be a founder, choose to be an entrepreneur, choose to spin out, and then Sheffield will support them. Leeds is much more, this is our structured process and we'll hold your hand all the way through it. And Manchester Tech Transfer Office is a separately owned company that's owned by the University of Manchester, but it's separate. They have a very gated, structured approach. So even those 3 universities are different in their approach to everything, let alone marketing. But they're all beginning to realize that however they do the commercialization process, that the marketing side of things is more missing than it should be. Let's put it that way. So I don't know that anybody's really got a very, very, very structured approach to it as yet. A lot of what the universities tend to focus on is the whole equity and the ownership and the intellectual property rights. And do we license or do we spin out a new entity? How do we commercialize this thing? And they're more into the mechanics than the magic, I think. Perhaps that's my new strapline, I don't know. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, because if you don't get the mechanics right, then obviously the rest of it is null and void anyway. But they do tend to be, I think, focused on the practical support rather than the whole, how are we going to make this thing fly once we let it go?
That makes sense. And I guess once the spin out is out the door, the company kind of has to go and survive on its own. Tech Transfer Office can't hold its hand through Series A, B, C rounds.
What everybody is realizing is that they're trying to make things as free of friction as possible so that the technology and the business that comes out of it, they don't fail for the wrong reasons. They don't fail because of red tape or politics or, the fact that we can get the IP sorted out or that we were all arguing over equity. Everybody, I think, has reached the point where they've realized they want these things to fly in the real world and they want to not get in the way of that. The more support they give them, in theory, the more equity they then want. And then does a VC then want to come in and go, well, actually, the university's got too much equity, etc. The more, to my mind, that the VCs and the universities start to work together, the more this is going to start to make sense, because then the first VC that gets on board, sort of set the tone for what happens going forward. Again, that's me vastly generalizing because I'm not a VC or a university, but I definitely see those relationships evolving, and I think Northern Gritstone and the universities up there and Deeptech Labs, I think that's a really good example of how everybody's talking to each other and hopefully playing nicely. It all seems like they're all playing very nicely. And that should only benefit the companies that spin out as a result, I would say.
The time has really flown by.
It has, isn't it?
We are coming up to the end of this. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention, or anything that you wanted to reiterate before we say goodbye?
I would love the world to realize that market strategy and marketing, it's a mindset and it's everything that comes between your company and your customers. Don't have the technology in a silo and the products in a silo and the finance in a silo and the focus on pitch decks and marketing something we'll fluffily bolt on later. Try and spin it around the other way. From day one, marketing is an outside-in thing, not an inside-out thing. So how do we put ourselves in the mind of our customers? What do they want? How can we talk their language? What will resonate with them? It's not about what we want to tell the world. It's about what the world needs to hear from us. And that's a difference in mindset. And if you take that mindset right from day one, I think that shapes how you behave and how you productize and how you commercialize and how you go out there into the real world. And that change in mindset, putting customers first, can only be a positive thing.
That is a really good message to end on. Nicky, this was brilliant fun. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and telling me more about your work. I've learned so much about marketing myself today. This is great.
Fantastic. It's been awesome. Thanks for having me.
The Next Leap is hosted and produced by me, Thierry Heles. Alex White composed the theme music and Jenna Clark is the graphic designer, while Roxy is the production supervisor and the best dog in the world. If this is your first time listening, make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button, and if you enjoyed the show, please give us a rating and share it with your colleagues. That is the best way to help the podcast grow. If you have any feedback or are interested in being a guest on a future episode, email me at thierry@thenextleap.is or message me on LinkedIn. And hey, did you know that The Next Leap isn't just a podcast, but I also do media and data research consulting. So if you'd like to work together or find out more about how I could help you, shoot an email to that same address, thierry@thenextleap.is. I'm taking a very short break next week for Easter, so I will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, thank you for listening. Or as we say back home in Luxembourg, merci, dass ihr gelauscht habt.